to our next session on the changes to the contest rulebook and changes that we need to be aware of for contests in 2020-2021. To conduct the next session, we have Matthew Welch, who is also our Sergeant of Arms today. And Matthew joined Toastmasters back in 2012, and he was studying as an engineer. And he soon realised that engineers aren't always famous for their communication skills. And in that bracket, we can add actuaries and accountants for those who are in the audience. This year, Matthew is now looking forward to being able to compete because, as you're probably aware, if you hold a district officer role, you're ineligible to actually compete. So to take us through the contest rule changes for next year, please welcome Matthew Welch.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so I've sent you all a link this morning. I just sent you the actual file this morning for the contest rulebook, and I've also dropped a copy of it into the chat. But I'm also going to share my screen, so if you want to read by yourself or if you want to follow along with me, that's fine. Now, every year, the rulebook gets updated. And we're not going to go through every single rule in the rulebook. We're just going to go through some of the key changes. Because most of you are probably largely familiar with the rules from last year. So what we're most interested in are the changes. I'm going to share my screen. Now, can you all see my screen? And can you hear me okay? Because I was having trouble with my microphone earlier. Is it okay now? All right, thank you. Now, in the introduction to the rulebook, it lets you know that every single change in the rulebook is marked with a little symbol in the margin to make them easier to find. Okay, so we're going to be going through the rule book and we're going to find those little markers and then we're going to look at those rule changes. Oh, look, here's our first rule change and it's about eligibility. So I'll zoom in on that so we can all read it. Okay. So as you know, for the International Speech Contest, there are educational requirements. So you need to have done a certain number of speeches or progressed a certain amount through the education program before you're allowed to compete in that contest. And previously, all it said was that a contestant must have completed 6 speeches in the Competent Communication Manual or achieved levels 1 and 2 in any pathways. But it wasn't explicit that you can only qualify by having done 6 speeches from the competent communicator if you were a Toastmaster before Pathways was rolled out. So if you're a new member, you can't find an old competent communicator manual, do 6 speeches and then compete because you weren't a member before the rollout. Any questions about that or comments, opinions?
It's talking a little bit. Matthew, please, can you explain it again? What does that mean, 6 educational speech? I'm a new member, so I am in the pathway. What's the difference?
Okay, so if you're under Pathways, and as a new member, you are, and it means that in order to compete in this contest, you need to have completed levels 1 and 2 of any path. Now, before Pathways, the requirement was different. And the requirement was that you must have done 6 speeches in the old program in order to be able to compete. So because you're a new member under Pathways, you're not allowed to find an old communication manual, do 6 speeches from that manual, and then say you're eligible for the international contest. You would have been able to do that last year, but this year you can't. It's a technicality that I suppose was missed.
So if I Matthew, if I complete, I'm up to level 4 now.
Mm-hmm.
So I am eligible to compete, yes?
Correct.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
No worries. What's not explicit is that if you did join Toastmasters before the rollout, so imagine if I did 5 speeches before the rollout, and then I do a 6th speech now, even though the old program is supposed to be dead, I might still be able to compete. It's not explicit about excluding those people, but I'm sure that's a very rare edge case that probably won't come up. Any more questions about that before we move on?
I just think it's a dumb rule.
Yeah. I suppose most people assume that, I suppose Toastmasters assumes everyone's going to approach the rule book and contests with some common sense, but there must have been some special people who tried to find ways around certain rules. So I guess that's why we have some of these new rules coming in.
Matthew,
Yes.
what year did Pathways roll out?
It rolled out to different
Thanks.
places around the world at different times. For us, it was December 2018.
28.
Okay,
Is
thank
that
you.
correct, Sue? Or anyone else who knows?
I think it was 2017.
I think it was
us in South Australia.
6th of December 2017.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
Thank you so much.
It's longer than I thought. All right. Thank you.
So there shouldn't be too many that would have still been hadn't done speech 6 that were from 2017.
Yeah, that's right. So everyone should be eligible under Pathways pretty soon anyway. So yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Just found our next rule change. So this rule, the context here is we're talking about eligibility still. Yeah, this is eligibility. I'm going to zoom in on this one. Contest chairs, chief judges, voting judges, tie-breaking judges, timers, counters, sergeants at arms, and test speakers may not compete in the contest at which they are serving in any of these roles. So what this means is that, for example, the chief judge doesn't really have anything to do during the contest other than sit there, right? Most of the time, we all know that. But that doesn't mean that they can also compete, because you could imagine that someone might say, oh, I'll be the chief judge, but then also compete. I suppose if you're at the club level and you're short of officials in the past, you would have been able to do that, but now you can't.
Matthew?
Yes.
Just on that, I think it also refers to if you are a member of Club A and you go to visit Club B and become a tally counter in, let's say it's the evaluation contest.
Yep.
You can't go back into your club and now compete in the evaluation contest.
No.
That's not the case.
That's how I'd read it.
No, it's not.
So here it says may not compete in the contest at which they are serving. If it said in the same contest at which they were serving, then you might be able to interpret that differently. But the contest at which they are serving, that means the same one that you're serving as a chief judge at the same event on the same day.
We should avoid it anyway.
Yeah, it's good to try and avoid those conflicts of interest, but yeah, it can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah,
when you have small clubs trying to organise contests. I suppose
Matthew?
another one. Yes.
Could we just clarify that that's only at club level?
This is at all
Because
levels.
At all. What I mean is actually what you were adding to, saying that you could actually go to another club contest and compete if you had been a chief judge, where I think that changes, and I'm glad Sue Pedrick's probably still here, I think that changes at area level and above.
Okay, so let's see if we can quickly find that.
Because it could be very unfair if you were a judge at your club down the road, let's say international speech. So you hear all those international speeches, you know you're about to compete at your own club in international. You could try and wipe out the strongest speech.
Yeah, well, that's why you guys, I know a code of no ethics.
Yes.
Right, but you can also go as a guest and still hear those same speeches. And
but you couldn't try and wipe them out.
Okay.
Well,
so,
no, you're right there, but yeah, it's
definitely an modality.
Yeah.
It's just like a test speaker, because a test speaker can actually do their competition speech, but if they do that in another club, well, then they give their opposition, they should bet to have heard what they said. So that's why it's not normally done, but it can be done. It's perfectly legal.
Cool.
But the test speaker is doing either a contest speech or a speech out of pathways when they perform their speech as a test speaker.
None, they can, but no, they don't normally do that.
There's a new rule about that later on, actually.
Yeah.
So regarding this specific rule, so if you're the contest chair, you can't compete in the same contest. You can't say, now I'm going to introduce Matthew with his speech titled, I'm also the contest chair. I'm also the contest chair, Matthew. And then, hey, you can't speak in your own contest if you're the contest chair.
No, that's obvious.
Yeah.
That's what that refers to.
And then slightly less obvious might be, for example, the tally counter, right? So the tally counter doesn't really do anything until after everyone's finished speaking. So conceivably someone could double up and be a contestant and a tally counter, but you can't do that. Cool. Any more questions relating specifically to that rule?
Just to comment, for Derek and Peter, I take the point about ethics, but we have to distinguish between ethics and rules, and we can't go making up rules that aren't in the rule book. So it might be a worthwhile ethical principle to point out, but it's what's in the rules that counts.
Correct, that's right, Mark. So we might find that if people are interpreting the rule book in an unethical way, then we'll end up with new rules in the rule book, and then those new rules become the rules. And there are a few more like that later on in this year's changes, which is exciting. Okay, the next rule change. Toastmasters who are members in more than one club and who meet all eligibility requirements are permitted to compete in the club contest in each club in which they hold paid membership. Now, this looks like exactly the same rule that was there last year, but I believe it adds this little phrase here, this extra condition, and who meet all eligibility requirements. So previously you might have been able to read it and interpret it as saying that if you're a member of more than one club, then you get magic eligibility requirements that override all the other eligibility requirements, which isn't true. So if you're a member of more than one club and you meet all the eligibility requirements, then you can compete in every club contest. So small technical detail. So I think there's any other questions about that? I don't think there should be any questions about that one. To be a chief judge, voting judge, or tiebreaker at Toastmasters speech contest at an area division district contest. So we saw this clause added as, I suppose we saw this rule added for the eligibility of contestants in the international speech. It's the exact same rule where if you're a new member, you can't go and complete speeches from the old program to make yourself eligible to be a judge. The same way you can't do that to be eligible to compete. Now, there's one rule here that's especially important. Okay. So here we are looking at the content of speeches that are given in speech contests.
Yep.
Now, previously, you could really only be disqualified for eligibility and originality. But there is a new rule here, and it says contestants must not reference another contestant or a speech presented by another contestant from the platform at the same contest in which they are competing.
Wow, that is different.
It is. And you'd be especially familiar with this, wouldn't you, Peter? Because I know at some of your clubs, speech giving and banter between the speaker and other contestants is quite a common occurrence. And
No,
that's not allowed anymore. Oh, sorry, Peter?
No, I think it's referring to the fact that when we held competition up at Bedford Park, now the very last contestant actually referred to the previous speech. That cannot be done in that, with that rule anymore.
That's correct.
So you've got to be careful of that. So yes, the very specific rule that has been noted and brought to the contestants' attention. That one.
Yeah.
May I ask a question, Matthew, in regards to that? It's Debbie from Geelong.
Certainly.
Okay, so it says at the same contest. Therefore, if at an event you have the humorist and you have your table topics, the second contest round you could, in fact, reference it because it's a contest or an event.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I suppose in extreme circumstances, when someone's being malicious, they might try to belittle a previous contestant, or they might perhaps try to use an idea from their speech that they spent a lot of time and effort developing in their speech, and you build on top of that for your speech, and that will sort of give you an advantage over other contestants.
Matt, can I say something?
Sure.
It's, I think it's when, like, say if me and you were in a competition and you spoke before me and I come straight after you, and it might be a subject, and you say, and just like in Matthew's speech, this point, this point, this point. And that's what it is. Yeah.
And that's what we've heard many times.
Yeah, you can't do that now in that same competition.
And my understanding is that it'll be, say, if you had speaker one do a speech and then you're the last speaker and you refer to the first speaker, that wouldn't be allowed.
No, not in the same competition.
Not in the same competition, yeah.
That's right, because you're just sort of agreeing to him, and it might be in a table topics where you're just chewing up your time. You're running out of things to say, and looks like what Matthew said, that point was good and blah, 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 and you just say, yeah, that's what it's for.
And I actually think about it being in the humorous contests that you could actually build the atmosphere upon something that had already been happening.
Good point. You can wait, because they'll laugh at you because they laughed at someone else. They're still laughing at
And then I thought that there could be some ways that are sort of very benign and innocent where you could break this rule. So, for example, say you're close personal friends with someone else who happens to be competing in the same contest and your speech is about them. Well, yeah, they wouldn't be allowed either under this new rule.
So just be very careful. If you are a normal, regular Toastmaster and you're used to doing segues and feeding off of previous events, and you are really comfortable with using that as your technique, if you are competing, you just have to really knock that out and make sure everyone around you are well aware of it to knock that out. So as Matt has said, no leveraging off anyone else, but watch that as being a Toastmaster. If you're doing that regularly, try not to do it when you lead into the contest, because it might be a habit that you just have innocently, and it could knock you out.
And it's also something that's quite important that might get missed when people update contest scripts and that sort of thing. So just be aware of that if you're a contest chair or giving a briefing or something.
This actually happened at the District International in 2016.
No.
So the first speaker made a comment that became an item of comedy for the entire weekend, and just about every other speaker after that made a reference to this funny comment that the first speaker had made, and tried to utilise it as a way of gaining more humour.
That's probably why they're all came in.
Well, interesting. Thanks for that, Mark. Any more questions about that? And we'll keep scrolling on. I think I've still got 15 minutes left, I think. All right, let's find the next rule change. Okay, now there are a heap of changes here that are just related to the international speech contest, but at the regional, quarterfinal, and the semi-final level. And I believe that the only changes are because we used to have regional quarterfinals, then we went regional semi-finals, and then finals. But now it's regional quarterfinals, semi-finals instead of regional semi-finals, and then finals. Is that correct? Sue, do you know, are you familiar with these rule changes?
Yeah. You should give me a thumbs up.
Yep. They're ones, Matthew, that we don't really need to worry about until we get up to that level.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're doing something important at that level, you should probably read the whole rule book anyway, just to double check.
Yeah.
Right?
Matt,
Yes.
who writes the changes? Lawyers, engineers, teachers?
Question.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's not
President of the
lawyers
Coast-
because of the way I've seen some of the changes worded in the past, but I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
It would come out of TMI in America.
Yeah, is there anyone in the room who actually knows who actually does this? Like whether it's the international president sits down with some of their people, or
maybe it's the chief grammarian.
Yeah, probably. So yeah, sorry, I don't know the answer to your question. Maybe it's written at the start of the document, and I'm not sure.
Okay, thank
The
you.
board creators at TI do this.
Okay, cool. And I'm pretty sure. I don't think the changes get voted on at a meeting, do they? I don't think I've ever heard of this coming up in a
No.
that anyone's had to vote on. All right.
If it's going to come up, it'll come up at World Headquarters at one of their big meetings.
Matthew, you just skipped one at number 10, which is quite important.
Number
If
10.
you go back.
Right here.
Number 10, contest officials must not serve in more than one role.
Contest officials must not serve in more than one role for the same contest at the area, division, district, regional quarterfinals, semi-final, and final levels.
Yep. So anyone who's going to judge at a higher level, they need to be aware of that.
Does say when applicable for after.
That's right. Yeah, that's very important when applicable. So it does have a clause to someone to do it.
Yeah.
So at club level, they might be the timer and a tally counter because you're short of people. But you could, the sergeant at arms might be the tally counter or something like that.
Yeah, but for area directors and for the area contests,
Once it gets to area,
it's different.
Different ball game.
Yeah.
Well, I think because the bracketing of the when practical is just after area, anything after that, the division district is removed from that.
Yeah. So I think previously we said at the area, everything has to be done completely properly. But now I think it's permissible if, say, the timer and the tally counter are the same people, if you're desperate. And sorry for missing that one, because I assumed that the only change there was changing regional semi-final to just semi-final. Move on to the next one. And this next one is important and affects all of us. Okay. So you'd all be familiar with the way we introduce speakers in contest, right? We say their name, the title of their speech, the title of the speech again, and their name. And that's how we've always done it for all contests. But now it's slightly different. So for the International Humorous Tall Tales, that's exactly the same. Name, speech title, name. For table topics, it's still the same. So we have the name, the topic, and the name. But for evaluation contests, it's now just the name twice. So I guess previously we would say, welcome John, with his evaluation of Jenny's speech. With his evaluation of Jenny's speech, welcome John. That's a bit superfluous because everyone knows you're evaluating Jenny's speech, right? So now we just say, this is John. John. Any questions about this rule? It probably flows better if you say first and last name rather than just first name. Cool. I think we're getting to the end of most of the big changes that affect us. But let's keep scrolling through because I think there was one other. Oh, I missed this one when I scanned through before.
Yeah, protest.
Here we go. Protests and disqualifications. Protests are limited to eligibility, originality, and this is the new part, and reference to another contestant's speech, and must only be lodged by voting judges and or contestants. Any protest must be lodged with the chief judge or contest chair prior to an announcement of the winners or not winners and alternates. Is that what we call the place getters now? Alternates? Is that right? And then we have here, before a contestant can be disqualified on the basis of originality or for referencing another contestant's speech, the contestant must be given an opportunity to respond to the voting judges. A majority of the voting judges must concur in the decision to disqualify. Well, that's new, I believe. So what's interesting is that it says protests are limited to eligibility, originality, and reference to another contestant's speech, but the rule stated further up was that you couldn't reference another contestant's speech or another contestant. So that seems to be, I'm not sure if that's deliberate or an accidental omission. So what this rule suggests is that you could refer to someone by name without referring to their speech, and that would be not okay by the rules that are up there, but you couldn't disqualify them for it down here, which is interesting. Anyone got any thoughts or feelings about that one?
I think they've just omitted to reference referring to the person in this part of the rule book, to tell you the honest truth. It seems to be that it in the other ruling, you know. But I mean, if you're going to go word for word by the rule book, what do you do?
But in a person's speech, you might be giving the speech about Fred, right?
Yes.
And some of the stuff that Fred does. Fred might have been competing, you know, maybe even after you, but you're not referring to Fred's speech. You're referring to how Fred plays badminton or whatever.
I don't think that's the reference previously.
Yeah, but it says it's another contestant.
So let me find this other rule.
The previous
Page
one.
9.
Page 9.
So I would think it'd be whatever's the speech is competing on the day. So if, say, Fred does a speech on the day, it would be that speech that would be taken into account as why you're not to refer to them.
Yeah.
It'd be in the contest, not so much the day. In the actual contest.
In the contest, yeah.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be like, oh, Fred does this, blah, blah, blah. It might, if it was in Fred's speech, he did this. That
would be a no-no.
Yeah, that'd be a no-no, yeah.
Cool. So what if I'm giving a speech and there's another contestant, and that contestant is, maybe they're very short, and so I'll make jokes about them being short without referencing their speech. According to this speech subject and preparation, that's not allowed. But I didn't actually reference their speech, which means that
You're very
it might be
technical,
difficult to disqualify me. Yeah.
It's Eric here. Reading through that, you have a number of things. You have a contestant that you can't refer to, and you also have a speech that you can't refer to in the same contest. And they're two distinct things.
Okay. That's what I thought, yeah. So...
Hello, can I say something?
Certainly.
Once I was in a contest, humorous contest, and previously in the table topics, one of the contestants had talked about Nana Muscuri, and in my speech I had a line saying I was listening to the radio, and then I said, but I wasn't listening to Nana Muscuri, and everybody just laughed so much. And yet I always found that adding those little bits always actually enhanced. But I think now you can't do that.
That's correct. That would get you disqualified.
Well, actually, because that was in a different contest.
Yeah, but the other
You actually referred to a different contest.
Event or contest.
Well, yes, it was contest, wasn't it?
Thing.
And what's the chances that you may have already written that into your speech, not knowing that the other one was going to even mention Nana Muscuri? Because the table topic would have been set beforehand. You wouldn't have known what the topic was going to be. Your humorous speech came up later.
You wouldn't know also if you weren't in the room. So if you're saying something, you're not in the room, there is no chance that you are referencing anything anyone else has said. So judges just need to be on the ball with this one in particular, and it needs to be highlighted in the briefing.
Yeah.
Well said. It's Eric here again. I think you've got to take it all into context. With these protests and disqualifications, as it says there, it's got to be done before the winners are announced. And the other thing is that the contestants has the right of reply, and there's also needs to be the majority of the disqualification. If we're looking at going it this way, then it will all be taken into account. It's just not straight down the line. So the judges will be taking a look at whether it was deliberate, not deliberate, and then they'll be voting on that before the disqualification occurs.
That's right. So I think with this particular rule here that I have highlighted on the screen, it sort of recognises that there are grey areas in the rules, and that the contestant should have a chance to respond, like you said.
And Matt, if anyone has a protest, don't worry about how much you hold up the contest. If it needs to be clarified, everyone gets invited out to have that discussion. That is the judges and the chief judge and the other judges, or even the contestants if it involves them and something has to be changed. So don't worry about holding up the contest. It has to be right.
Cool. Thank you, Sue.
Hey,
and
Matthew?
Yes?
We're now 7 minutes over time.
Are we really? Oh, I thought all right.
Matt, I'm happy to give you time to finish this. This is really important.
Yeah, this is important. All right. So one quick thing to note about this rule here is that you don't have to get all the judges together and vote about whether or not to disqualify someone if it's on the basis of eligibility, because eligibility is pretty black and white. Originality and referencing another person's speech, that's kind of a grey area, and that's why you get to vote. I don't know what the difference is between this rule here. Maybe it just wasn't written. Maybe they just changed the wording. The international speech contest begins at the club level and proceeds through the area, division, district. Oh, that's just changing regional semi-final to just semi-final. It's another trivial one.
And that's just reminding people that if you complete a club, it's the same club you represent all the way through to district. in our district. But if your club folds for any reason, you're wiped out. So you need to make sure that your club from the beginning stays eligible to be an eligible club to support you all the way through. You can't change clubs, you can't change divisions or areas.
Correct. Thank you, Sue. These 3 changes here all refer specifically to the World Championship of Public Speaking. So if you're involved in that, you can read them yourself. Evaluation contest rules. This is an interesting one. The test speech must be a contest type speech or a project speech from the Toastmasters Pathways Learning Experience. So for example, you can't do an interpretive reading because you feel like it, unless it's for a Pathways project. Is that rule clear to everyone?
Yep. The old rule there, Matthew, was it had to be from the CC manual.
Okay, cool.
So that obviously just basically rewords it from the old CC manual to Pathways.
Cool. Thanks, Derek. There's a rule change here. This is about when the contestants get their notes given back to them. So after 5 minutes have elapsed, no further preparation is allowed, and all contestants must hand their copy of the evaluation contestant notes sheet to the contestant sergeant-at-arms. The evaluation contestant notes sheet must be handed back to contestants as they are introduced to present their evaluation. So you've probably experienced where it's a bit ambiguous. It's like, oh, do they get their notes when they enter the room? Do they get their notes immediately before they start walking? Well, now it's clear. As soon as they're introduced, they get presented with their notes.
So that would be they presented with their notes at the lectern.
No.
When as they're introduced.
Yeah, by their name.
Because sometimes they've been given their notes as they walk in the door or just prior to walking in the door. All those sorts of things has happened in the past.
Yeah. So imagine this, right? Here's the contest chair standing in the middle of the stage, and here's little Johnny standing next to the sergeant-at-arms, waiting to compete, and the contest, they've just walked in the room. Little Johnny still doesn't have his notes. The contest chair says, "Please welcome little Johnny." That's when the sergeant-at-arms gives little Johnny his notes, says, "Little Johnny," and then Johnny grabs his notes and walks up, and then he speaks.
You must have been a piano player with those waving fingers.
Oh, thank you. Maybe it should have been a puppeteer or a teacher or something. I don't know.
Preparation.
Okay.
Page 20.
So this rule is about, I think the intent of the change here is to make it clear that you can't make money from running a contest, and also that you can't charge contestants. So I'll read it to you. Determine the budget for the contest, remembering that contest income and expenses should break even. Allow for such expenses as awards, contest material, deposits, meals, printing, postage, etc. If an entry fee is required, the fee must be waived for contestants. Contestants cannot be charged a fee to compete. Cool.
They can be charged to eat food, but they can't be charged for competing at all.
Good point. Thank you, Sue.
Can spectators be
Was that can
spectators visit?
Sorry, there's a very loud typer going on somewhere. Hang on. Oh, I can't see who it is because I'm sharing screen. All right.
As in visitors or spectators.
Yeah.
You might have to be paying for a room hire, etc.
That's right.
You work out it's $100 for the room hire. You've budgeted for 50 people to arrive. So you said $2 a head for the room hire. Now you get 60 people in.
Yep.
You're going to make a profit.
Derek, whack the food up a couple more bucks to pay.
Yeah. So the idea is you're not.
That's how you get around it.
You're not supposed to try and make a profit. Like,
Yeah.
And you're allowed to charge people. You're not trying to make money from it. You
No.
can't charge contestants. That's the spirit of the rule.
But if only 49 turn up, you make a loss.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, we're saying that this has got a rule change here. Acquaint contestants with the exact speaking area, such as the lectern, tables, lighting, microphone, etc. Pretty standard. All contestants must have the opportunity to test any amplifying equipment before the contest. I think that's the new part. Be aware of that.
That could be a little bit tricky with your table topics where you're escorted out of the room and then mic'd up just prior to walking on.
Yeah, but they should get an opportunity to check that during the briefing. That was related specifically to the briefing, I believe. Contestants briefing. So during the briefing, if you're a contestant and you want to test the microphone, you can.
Even if the briefing
Yeah.
takes longer.
Even if the briefing does take longer.
Correct. Okay. This is a new one. So acting as this is a chief judge's checklist. Acting as the chief counter. Okay, so the chief judge, acting as the chief counter, provides each counter with a copy of the counter's tally sheet. So what usually happens is that all the tally counters get given one sheet to tally count for the whole contest. Well, now it looks like you have to give everyone a sheet. Don't know why, but that's what the rules say.
Supposed to have been doing that anyway.
Yeah. And then that is the end of the booklet. Are there any quick questions before we move on? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Remember, if you have any questions about the rules, consult the rule book. And if that doesn't help you, consult one of your peers. Mr. Toastmaster.